Well, thanks everyone for coming to my talk. My name's Ryan Smith, and I'm the founder of a company called TruDiagnostic. We measure epigenetics, which I'm really excited to introduce to you today. We're going to talk about a lot of things. My slide talk is sort of 100 biomarkers from a single drop of blood, which is, sounds a lot like Theranos. It's why I didn't wear my black turtleneck today, but we're going to talk about some fun things. So to get it all started, does anyone know what the #1 risk factor for all of these conditions are? You can just shout it out if you think you know. Okay. All right, so not quite, I didn't hear the right answer here, so we're gonna keep going. So these are the top 3 causes of death in 2020, COVID-19, heart disease, and cancer. We see there are 4 risk factors for each of these diseases, but one, that big bar right there, is super important. And it's the same risk factor we talked about earlier. Does this help anyone in understanding that risk? So unfortunately, I still haven't heard it, but we're gonna go for its age, actually. The aging process is the #1 risk factor for every chronic disease, and not just by a little, but by a lot. I think everyone here knows how bad smoking is for you, right? They know how bad obesity is for you, and look how much aging those pale in comparison to aging, right? Aging is easily 10 times the relative risk of obesity for all of these different causes of death. And so we know aging is super important. If everyone in the world were to cut their aging rate by 7 years, we would reduce the incidence of disease in half. 50% of people would no longer be sick. And if everyone were just to increase their life expectancy by 1 year, the US would save over $256 billion. So aging is incredibly important. But aging is also a little bit difficult because we probably all know people in their 70s who look like they're in their 50s, right? And people in their 50s who maybe look like they're 70, unfortunately. And so this differentiates a process we call chronological versus biological aging. Obviously chronological is sort of an arbitrary definition, right? It's the number of times we've taken trips around the sun. Whereas this biological process is the thing that determines how we feel on a day-to-day basis, not just about our function, but our risk of developing all of these conditions. And the good news is that this biological aging process can be mitigated. And so let's talk about this process. How do we measure biological aging? Well, really this process started even in the 50s. And in the 50s, this sort of started by calculating your biological age as your chronological age minus 1 year for every pack per day you smoked, right? Really crude measurements of this process. But now we've gotten really, really sophisticated. Really, the sophistication in this measurement took a major leap in 2013 with something called the Steve Horvath methylation clock. And originally, this wasn't even used for health. It was used for things like dating people if they left their DNA at a crime scene, where you could see how old that person was. Or it was used to date Syrian refugees who were going into Europe. Were they adults or were they minors, and then therefore eligible for asylum? And so this process, since 2013, has come a really long way. But the basic type of biological data that's being input is something we call epigenetics. And so I don't know if many of you are familiar with epigenetics, but epigenetics, good, I'm glad we have one person. The epigenetics means above the genome. So epi means above, genome or genetics, as you all are very, very familiar with. And this is one of the most important pieces of our identity and our sort of health. So every single cell in your body has the exact same DNA, right? Your brain cells, your heart cells, your skin cells, they all have the exact same DNA sequence. And so you can test this, right? Most people have probably taken a DNA test from 23andMe or Ancestry.com. And these are really cool tests, but unfortunately, they're also very static. So you take one test of your DNA across a lifetime, and that tells you all the information you'll ever get from that analysis. So one of the big questions we have is that if every cell in your body has the same DNA, how do they behave so differently? How does your heart cell become a heart? How does your skin become skin and behave like skin? And the answer is it's by what DNA is turned on or off, right? So we all might have the same genetic expression, but we might be activating what genes are turned on versus which genes are turned off in very different instances. And so that's how we go from these pluripotent stem cells to the cell types that become the function and identity that we need them to be. And so this all happens via a process called epigenetics. And that's what we really are measuring to tell you about about that biggest risk factor. How are you aging? And so one of the things that we're looking at is DNA methylation. And when I say this, you all might immediately think about things like MTHFR or COMT. Many of you might have heard about these genetic variants which affect our ability to methylate. You might hear about, think about Gary Brecka, as an influence. He talks a lot about these DNA methylation genes. But we are not talking about this type of methylation. We're not talking about biochemical methylation. What we are talking about is the actual methylation that attaches to your DNA. So if we think about this process of epigenetics as the on or off switches, then we can think about DNA methylation being that off switch. Whenever a methyl group, just a small carbon group, attaches to the cytosines in your DNA, it shuts off that DNA expression. And DNA methylation by itself is not good or bad. For instance, if you have an oncogene that causes cancer, we want that to be shut off. We want that to be methylated. But if you have a tumor suppressor gene, the one that fights cancer, then we want that to be unmethylated and turned on. And so methylation itself is not good or bad, but it's the process by which we control all of the functions in our body. And this happens at a massive, massive scale. Every single cell in our body has this process going on at 29 million different locations in the genome. And every single cell is different. And that's how our cells behave so differently. That's how they get the identity of becoming the cell type and behavior that they're supposed to be. So our immune system can act like an immune system, or our retinal cells can actually process images in light. It all happens by this process of DNA expression. And the good news about this is that we are now finally starting to be able to read this at really high scale. And the great part about this is that everything in your life can be quantified via this process. So how much sleep you get, we see it in your epigenetics. We can even predict what zip code you've lived in most of your life due to pollution markers on your epigenetic expression. So whether it's your medications, your stress, your nutrition, we can see it all within the epigenome and how your cells are expressing themselves. It is incredibly cool, and it brings us to the larger vision that we're going to talk about, which is how we can get thousands of biomarkers from a single drop of blood. We're creating the Rosetta Stone of how to read these different patterns. So with that being said, we can use this data to create predictions of your biological age. And so really, what should this biological age process be used for? Essentially, we want to use it as a predictor. You probably heard about a lot of amazing, great therapies here, whether it's the IV nutrition from Liquivita back there, or hyperbaric therapies, or red light. All of these therapies are really, really exciting. But if we want to see how they're impacting our overall lifespan and health span, unfortunately, right now, we really only have one option, which is to try it and wait 40 years to see what happens, right? To see if we're actually going to die early or we're going to live 10 years longer. And this is problematic, right? If we want answers, I think that everyone here is a biohacker in origin, right? We want to change our bodies, and we want to see if it works. And so we all have our anecdotal subjective feelings. We can try something and see how it works, but we also need really good data to say, are we actually improving these outcomes, or are we not helping them very much? And that's what these biological age clocks really should be used for. They can predict outcomes extremely well. So for instance, we published an algorithm with Harvard that is predictive of death. It's got a 92% accuracy at predicting death within 5 years. So we can predict death very, very accurately. But the good thing is we can also then do interventions, look at those epigenetics, run the same algorithm, and see if we can extend lifespan. And we can do it in real time. So over the course of just 6 months or a year even, we can see some of these changes. So that's what we really have started to do at TruDiagnostic. Many of you might be familiar with people like Brian Johnson. We've created with him things like the Rejuvenation Olympics, which is a leaderboard and competition for who has the best aging. But in addition to that, we've published a lot of ways to read this epigenetic data. We've created skin clocks, retrovirus clocks. We've created a whole host of clocks with some of the best university collaborators in the world. So we do a lot of research in this area of aging. And by the end of the talk today, I'll get to the part that matters, right? Which is what should we actually do to improve our aging process. But I want to just mention we are so committed to this research. We have the largest epigenetic database in the world, now over 120,000 patients that have tested on our platform. We've published over 45 studies. And so this comes with a lot of scientific reputability as well. It's not just a fortune teller telling you, hey, you're going to live this long. We actually have data to show that our algorithms are predictive and real with some of the best universities in the world. And if you don't believe me, you can just hear from some of our best scientific collaborators right here. Oh, sorry. It's not playing, but this is, for those who don't know, Khloe Kardashian, I think. She here says when they took our test that this is the best effing test she's ever taken. And that's probably because she did really, really well on this, actually. So she had one of the lowest aging rates and would be a competitor on those Rejuvenation Olympics. I say all this to just say that this test is really fun. And so I like to talk about what you get back on a test like ours, and then first off, how you would apply it and why it's important. So one of our favorite algorithms is one we created with Duke. This is what we use with Brian Johnson on the Rejuvenation Olympics. This tells you how fast you're aging on a biological year-per-year basis. So you want this value to be super low. And it's instantaneous, so it can tell us how we're doing right at this moment. So this person at 0.77 is aging really, really well. So for every 1 year that this person is aging biologically, she's only aging, or chronologically, she's only aging 0.77 years biologically. So for every year, she's basically has 0.2 years that she's aging slower. And that's a really, really good score. We know that this particular value is correlated to every quality of life metric you can imagine. It's dependent, it helps determine your IQ with aging, your mental processing speeds, your gait speed, your grip strength. The lower you keep this value, the more you can expect all of those things to improve over time. And so this is really one of our favorite algorithms. I also like to mention that these are actually real people. To create this algorithm, we basically followed a group of 1,037 people from the time they were born until now 52 years of age. In these pictures, these are real composite images of everyone in that cohort at the age of 45. And so you can see the people that are on the right side. Those are the fastest aging people with the Dunedin pace metric. So whenever we tested people, we put the 10 fastest aging composite images, and that is what these people look like, versus the 10 slowest aging members with the Dunedin pace. Those people are on the left. And you can see that despite being the same chronological age of 45, they looked vastly different in their aesthetics, right? The people on the right might look even up to 10 to 15 years older than the people on the left. And so, you know, keep doing all of your hydration, your creams, your Botox, but also treat the underlying process of skin aging in the first place, which is the aging process of the body in this epigenetic regulation. And so we can actually now with this clock determine, again, what you're going to look like, how you're going to age, and this is a really, really good example. But one of the big problems that we've had over time is the lack of personalized guidance, right? We can give you an aging score, and you might be aging well, or you could be aging not as well. But the problem is most of our recommendations have always been the same. So caloric restriction, eating less calories than you're burning every single day, is one of the most well-validated therapies for anti-aging. So if you're aging fast, we might recommend this. And actually, we've done studies with Cornell where we've shown that even just 10% caloric restriction is really effective at reversing this biological age metric. And so that's great. But unfortunately, even if you're the slowest member, we're probably still gonna recommend the same thing because we know it works. And so if we're really recommending the same outcome, does this really make it valuable to test, right? Shouldn't you just go ahead and do caloric restriction and not worry about the testing? Well, you know, we think the answer is no, but I'll show you ways that we've went to improve this. So right now, one of the other clocks we've created is one we published with Yale called Symphony Age. And this doesn't just give you an age overall, it certainly does do that, but it also gives you an age for each of these 11 organ systems. So now we can be much more specific in how we age. So some people might be aging faster because they've smoked, right? And for people who've smoked, we would see cardiovascular aging increase. We'd see lung aging increase. But we might not see some of the other systems increase as much. And so now we can get really personalized with these interventions. We can tell you exactly where you're aging, so you can plan to take action in those specific areas. So this is what our report looks like. It actually tells you exactly where you're aging, and then we're gonna focus on the areas where that is accelerated. And we've done a lot of different interventional trials, so here I'll just show you. These are just 5 interventional trials we did. Gastric bypass, metformin, kidney transplant, kidney dialysis, and smoking cessation. And what we see here is that whenever you do these therapies, you see age reduction in the areas that we would expect. So for people who stop smoking, their lung age goes down, their kidney age goes down, their heart age goes down. For people who do gastric bypass and lose a lot of weight, their metabolic aging goes down. And for people who do metformin, a lot of different components go down. And as metformin looks to be a very exciting aging drug, but unfortunately this cohort was an HIV cohort, so they look to be better than most. But another approach we've given to taking really specific intervention recommendations is to test everything we could possibly measure. So I'm going to introduce this term to you all called the multiome. And for people who are in this diagnostic field like we are, this is pretty much everything you can measure in a single person. You all have heard about genomics. Today I've hopefully introduced epigenomics, that whether that DNA is turned on or turned off. That then leads to the creation of mRNA, which we call transcriptomics. Those mRNA create proteins and peptides, which we call proteomics. Those create the infrastructure of the body, which then have processes we call metabolomics. And then lastly, we get the phenome, which is what actually happens to us as we get older. And so in a study that we did with Harvard, we measured all of these different things in 5,000 individuals. It cost us about $15,000 per patient to do this, which explains just how crazy it is because it's really hard to apply on a personal level, right? No one has $15,000 to just measure everything in their entire body. And so we tried to do one thing to help solve this, which is we sort of asked the question, can we predict all of these different things through just DNA methylation? So with the paired data sets, we asked, can epigenetics, the data that we're taking, actually predict all of these other levels? And the answer is absolutely. We published this in December of 2024, so it's hot off the presses, but we can actually tell you 1,700 different biomarkers from a single drop of blood and the epigenetic patterns that live there. So we can tell you everything from your amino acids, your vitamins, your minerals. So we can tell you about your HDL and LDL particle sizes. We can tell you how much you've smoked across an entire lifetime. We can tell you if you've used illicit drugs like marijuana or MDMA or psilocybin. But we put this together into a report that can do things that quantify things that we really like. And this is how we get to the title of the talk. We get to the title of the talk by saying, with one single drop of blood now, we can quantify all of these proteins, metabolites, and things in your body. So whether or not we're talking about all of the chemicals you might have heard about today, PFAS chemicals, pesticides like glyphosate, lead exposure, all of these things are recorded in your epigenome by the gene expression of your body, and now we can read those patterns to effectively tell us what works. And we can do this in just quantifying those markers, but we can also do this to help us tell us what is driving your aging process. Because once we create these aging algorithms, we can see how these things correlate and where we should target individual interventions for you. So if you're high in something that we really want to be low, we'll tell you. And if you're low in something that we know is really important to be high, we can also let you know that as well. And so the way that we're using this now is really on a personalized medicine basis on an individual level. So I'll give you one example. Right now, again, we're just taking a simple blood spot finger stick test. We can then tell you about all of your supplements, vitamins, and nutrients. We can tell you about your vitamins A, D, E, K. We can tell you about your omega-3 levels. We can tell you about your NAD supplement levels. And then now people are actually compounding nutrient products like this in microcapsules so you can get the first fully personalized supplementation levels. Again, we just do the testing. At TruDiagnostic, it's sort of our belief that if we create the best tools to measure, we're going to have many, many interventions succeed. It's sort of like the old adage, if you teach a man to fish, they'll fish for a lifetime. We think if you give them the right tools to measure the aging process, they'll find hundreds of things which can help reverse that process. And so that's really what we do. This is just an application which is really helpful for the data that we're creating. So I also want to give a really practical example. If you come away from my talk with one thing, I want to talk about this idea of NAD. So who here has taken an NAD supplement or an NAD IV? Okay, so a good number of individuals. For those of you who haven't, NAD has been really branded and known as a longevity molecule. It's a metabolite which helps activate a lot of enzymes. And things like sirtuins, things like PARP enzymes, all of the things that help our body recover from DNA damage, help improve the immune system, and a lot of other things. And so in recent years, two particular supplements have been coming on the market. One is called nicotinamide riboside. It's in brands like TruNiagen, if you're familiar with that. And the other is nicotinamide mononucleotide, another precursor. And for years, there's been a debate about which one is better. Nicotinamide riboside has probably had the most research in the market. It looks really good. But other notable individuals like David Sinclair from Harvard have said that NMN is the product you should be using. So we used these epigenetic biomarker proxies in our cohort to do a quick analysis. So we have about 20,000 people who've been taking nicotinamide riboside. We have another 20,000 people that have been taking nicotinamide mononucleotide, these oral precursors of NAD. And we sort of asked the question is, for the people who are taking NMN, what happened to all of their NAD pathway products? We did the same thing with the nicotinamide riboside, and we found something very, very interesting. And so I won't bury the lead any longer. What we found is that the nicotinamide riboside works substantially better at increasing NAD levels endogenously. And really, the nicotinamide mononucleotide hardly increases any of the downstream pathways of NAD. So if you're having to choose, our data suggests in around 40,000 individuals that the nicotinamide riboside is a much better product if you were trying to improve your NAD. And we can do this even cross-sectionally because we can do this with 1,700 different variables. This is just a few of these in this NAD pathway, which led us to say, if you really want to treat the NAD pathway with aging, use nicotinamide riboside instead of the NMN. And so generally, if you're performing a test like ours, all you have to do is take a fingerstick blood spot. What we do is we isolate that DNA, and then in our lab, we do an analysis of those epigenetic patterns. And again, this is just the beginning of epigenetics. Epigenetics will change almost everything in our lives from a medical standpoint. One of my favorite facts is that even right now, due to climate change, broccoli is now epigenetically growing as cauliflower. It's sort of changing expression to be more robust as climate change happens. And the epigenetic, I would say, associations are endless. Agriculture is one of my favorites because there are a lot of these small tips and tricks. So for instance, the amount of citrus produced in an orange, epigenetically regulated. The ability for ducks to imprint, epigenetically regulated. One of my favorites is that when a queen bee dies, the colony has to also create another queen bee. So epigenetically, one of those other bees switches to the epigenetic expression of a queen, and they live 10 times longer just from epigenetic expression. And so we're reading these patterns with just a small drop of blood, analyzing them, and then helping you use them to improve your health. So let's get to the actual brass tacks of it and say what actually works to reverse aging. So we just published a study with Yale on 51 different human interventional trials for aging. And if anyone would like to talk about this or talk about strategies to improve with real world data with these algorithms, I'm more than happy to talk about it. We did come out with this publication, and these are the 51 different studies we looked at. To not bury the lead too much, we found some amazing things. We found things like, for instance, hyperbaric oxygen were incredibly effective at reversing the epigenetic aging process. Even just a few dives over the course of a few weeks had a couple years of age reduction. We see things like the vegan diet versus the omnivore diet. We did a study with with Stanford that was on Netflix, which compared vegan versus omnivore diets in twins. So we had one identical twin go on a vegan diet, one go on an omnivore diet, and compared the results. And in just 8 weeks, we saw age reduction in the vegan diet where we did not see it in the omnivore diet. We see things like vitamin D and omega-3s in a study that was recently published with over 700 individuals over the course of a year. Vitamin D and omega-3 fatty acids reversed epigenetic age just by the basic supplementation. We also know things like, for instance, senolytics, if you're using any of those, also highly effective at reversing the epigenetic age process. And we even found things we didn't expect, like ketamine interventions for treatment-resistant depression having an improvement in the biological aging process. We also found some things that didn't work as well. So things like dexamethasone or kidney dialysis had negative impacts on some of these aging clocks altogether. And so with that being said, I hope you all have enjoyed the talk today. I hope that you all will go and test your biological age, whether it's with us or another platform. If you are a healthy individual, it is the biggest risk factor for all chronic disease and death. If you had a family history of cardiovascular disease or a family history of Alzheimer's, you would not ignore the #1 risk factor for each of those diseases and still the number one risk factor for each of those diseases is still aging. 90% of your relative risk of Alzheimer's is due to your biological aging process. So if there's one thing we encourage you to measure, it is certainly this. But if you're looking to get all of your biomarkers, you can get it all from that same data point and get really, really unique biomarkers like those environmental chemicals, the NAD pathways, even things like spermidine or alpha-ketoglutarate. Some of these other supplements for biohacking and longevity can be quantified only through DNA methylation. So if you all have any other questions, feel free to find us at our booth. The company is TruDiagnostic, and I hope we can answer your questions. Thanks so much.
Ryan Smith, ladies and gentlemen. Let's hear it for me one more time. Just thank you. It feeds my narcissism. It's a condition. I deserve it. I'm oppressed. You need to cater to it. With that said, we're going to keep rolling. Our next topic, Detox 3.0, healing from the inside out. Oh, 60 seconds. Cool. Well, y'all have to look at me for another 60 seconds. Are there any questions I can answer about anything in the world? Biohacking, politics? Can I put your mind at ease about anything?